What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Remote Front Office. Today we're going to go over a couple of breaking news, small things, and then kind of the future that we have planned for the channel here over these next couple of weeks. But before we get into it, if you guys are new to the channel, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. We are here at least once a week, up to 3 times a week when it gets really busy. But yeah, so let's go ahead and get into it. As you guys can tell, there was no episode Friday. With the holiday and everything, I ended up taking Friday off. And there really wasn't much to talk about Friday anyway, so I didn't really feel like there was a need, like there wasn't any breaking news or anything that really warranted a whole episode Friday, right? And then we had the news on, what day was that? I believe it was Saturday, right? Yeah, it was Saturday. That Demar DeRozan was meeting with the Kings. And then pretty quickly after that, it got announced Demar was signing with the Kings. The initial number, I believe, was 3 for 70, and then it kind of kept bouncing around until I believe the final number is now 3 for 76. It is a sign and trade, obviously, because of the Kings cap room. And we will get into all three sides of the sign and trade because it ended up being a three-way deal. I think we start with Sacramento, right? Because they're the ones gaining the best player out of all the players in this trade, right? I understand it for the Kings, right? Because as Woj described it in his initial tweet here about the Western Conference arms race, right? So obviously you've had just different moves throughout the year. Obviously the Clippers got a little worse because of Paul George leaving, but you had last year where Durant and Beal were added to the Western Conference. You've had Clay now signing in Dallas. You've had these different moves. Wemby's obviously going to get better. Just all these different moves, and it shows that basically almost the entire West is competing, right? You've got obviously teams like Portland. That's really the only team that's truly tanking on purpose, right? San Antonio may be in that conversation just because of their current roster. Houston maybe as well, just because again may have too many guys that are young and unproven. But just different stuff like that, right? So it's not necessarily teams intentionally trying to be bad on purpose, like the Eastern Conference, where you have the Bulls, the Wizards, um, the Hornets, like all those sort of teams that you know are going to be in the bottom, or pretty much guaranteed to be in the bottom. Uh, and then you have the West, where it's basically all at least like 14 teams are competing, right? Um, I understand it for Sacramento's point, right? You're obviously not getting a big name guy. And also the initial thoughts with Sacramento was Levine, right? It wasn't necessarily DeMar until the DeMar market kind of evaporated, and then they met with DeMar. DeMar signed. That's how it went. I think DeMar's a better bet than Levine. Health wise, DeMar's been on the court more, knock on wood. I understand he's not a great 3-point shooter. He's an okay 3-point shooter, though. It's not like he doesn't take them at all. It's not like he's Ben Simmons and refuses to take um, 3-pointers at all. Also, the fact that he's a really elite mid-range shooter, right? Uh, he can work off the catch. He can work off of pin downs. You know, that weak side corner, he can't hit that three. And I just think with how um, just innovative Sacramento's been with their offense, I don't see a way where he doesn't fit and they don't make it work, right? He still, I think, is like a 20-point per game guy easily. I know he's normally been about 25. I think that comes down a little bit just because you have Sabonis, you have Fox, and I think Kevin Huerter's going to be better this year again. And I think all of that put together, it drops his points per game a little bit, but maybe ups the efficiency, right? Maybe it ups his free throws. Maybe it ups like just his general true shooting percentage, right? All in all, I like it offensively for them. Don't love it defensively because you're either having to play Keon Ellis, who's not a great shooter in the starting lineup for his defense, or you're having to rely on Keegan Murray, who's still a pretty young guy, to play basically all of your defense for you, right? Sabonis isn't a great rim protector. Fox, at least laterally, because of his quickness, can stay in front of some guys sometimes, but he's not necessarily a sit down in the chair. You also don't want your best player to have to be that guy, right? If he doesn't have to be. And I just think that in order for this team to A, make a run in the playoffs, right? But B, make a sustained run in the playoffs, you have to have more defense out there. And just with the trio they currently have, I don't see it as far as how are you going to defend OKC? How are you going to defend a team like Dallas? How are you going to defend a team like Denver, Minnesota, right? Like, just I don't see it defensively from that side. I get it. You want to stay relevant. You had a down year last year. You're trying to make sure that this team stays in the playoff race, especially after the horribly long drought they had before they made the playoffs 2 years ago. I get it from that perspective, right? Um, it's still defensively, I'm a little concerned. I do like the idea maybe as we progress in the year. I know their rookie Devin Carter ended up having surgery on his shoulder. Curious to see how long that takes for him to come back. But I wouldn't be surprised if maybe there's stretches where he's playing. From everything I saw, at least watching him before the draft, seems like he's a very plug and play guy. And having maybe him next to De'Aaron Fox, right? With his shooting, with his defense, with his versatility, it might end up opening the team up a little bit more, right? That pick makes a little more sense for me now. Now that you've shipped out a Davion Mitchell, you've shipped out Chris Duarte, who we'll get to later. Like those sort of guys, it kind of frees up your guard minutes more than I initially thought they would have. Let's now pivot to the Spurs, right? So the Spurs in this deal hop in kind of almost last second. They grab Harrison Barnes, who is not Harrison Barnes of like 3 years ago, right? Harrison Barnes 3 years ago made a lot of sense for most teams. He's taken a couple of steps back. He's starting to kind of regress. But they also get an unprotected pick swap in 2031, which De'Aaron Fox hasn't signed an extension yet, right? Also, 2031 is a very long time away. Demar's probably not on this team by that point. Sabonis, who knows? De'Aaron Fox, who knows? There's a lot of variables for a team historically that hasn't been, at least the last 20 or so years, that has not been a consistent playoff team, a consistent performer, a consistent top half of the league, right? It's a pretty good bet if you're San Antonio. They clearly are stockpiling picks for when Wemby is in his prime and potentially at his most expensive, when he's on his supermax deal, when maybe a guy like Castle or a guy that you draft next year or the year after, when those guys start to get expensive, San Antonio very clearly is trying to stockpile up picks and assets for when that happens so they can make moves on the margins or potentially trade for a star once Wemby's like 25, 26 and he's ready to contend. Maybe you package these picks together and you go get a start, whoever's available at that time, right? I think it makes a lot of sense for them. They are very clearly taking the long term route. I know when we initially did the Spurs video, I had them taking a long term route. This is the longer term route, right? Because they didn't use both picks this year. They're picking up salaries that may not necessarily help them win right now. They're getting assets for in 6, 7, 8 years, right? They're really taking the longest term view possible. And it's very clear what it looks like, at least Wemby is on board with this not being a let's compete for the play-in next year, and the playoffs the year after, and then the championship the year after that, right? That's not the path they're trying to take right now. They're trying to take what is the way that we can sustain this and make sure that we have as many options open as possible for years to come, right? For decades to come. Also, the fact you got Harrison Barnes, is he what Harrison Barnes used to be a couple years ago? No. But he's a good mentor for guys. He can play spot minutes for you. He doesn't have to play 30 minutes a game. I do like him potentially maybe even starting a handful of games next to Wemby at that power forward, give him a little bit more spacing, a little more versatility. I do like that, especially when you have Castle to be the primary defender on most nights, right? I think having just this option here of Harrison Barnes, and then in a year when he becomes an expiring, he's a tradable asset at that point, right? You just have to wait out this year. He plays a handful of minutes for you, and then you ship him out next offseason when he's an expiring for somebody else. Or maybe at that time, somebody else has a bad contract they want to dump and will give you more assets for it. And so you deal Harrison Barnes, and then you take on an extra 2 years of somebody else, and you get more picks in the process, right? Like this just opens San Antonio's versatility again, right? And it's pretty much the exact opposite of what the Bulls did, right? So as you guys know, Bulls fan, I'm trying to see this with the rebuild in mind, right? We got Chris Duarte out of this, and we got 2 seconds. Chris Duarte is not always healthy. He's shown flashes, though. I do like the flashes as far as both sides of the ball, right? Not a guy that I think is a consistent starter. A guy that's kind of fringe bench role kind of guy, right? So not a lot of, I wouldn't say not a lot of upside, but we kind of know what he is already, right? And the Bulls made it very clear they weren't wanting to take on extra salary because of the luxury tax. We're pushing on the luxury tax, and also the roster's pretty much set at this point, right? There's not a lot of wiggle room to add players to this. We would have had to cut somebody. In my mind, who the hell cares, right? If anything, even if, say, we got 1 second instead of 2 seconds, and we got the first. Going into the luxury tax for a team that potentially could get out of it by, say, the trade deadline, because you could either trade Vooch with only a year and a half left at that point. You could trade LaVine with 2.5 years left. There's different moves. You could go salary dump Javon Carter with one of the picks we got, say one of the seconds we got in this trade, right? Or maybe we package Javon, LaVine, and the Portland first that it seems like is all but going to eventually become seconds, right? We package that, salary dump him somewhere, done, right? You could have done other things to get out of the luxury tax. It was not a set in stone, oh my God, we're in the luxury tax, we're screwed, right? And it's also very clearly going to be 1 year in the luxury tax, right? Because next year, if we don't somehow trade LaVine this year, that's an extra year off his salary. Now he's only at 2 years. Maybe he's a little bit more healthy, shows a little more promise. Maybe a team takes a chance. Maybe a team panics at the trade deadline and takes a chance. Vooch then becomes an expiring. Much easier to move Vooch at that point, right? Even with a couple of seconds or something like that. Like, we had more options. You take Harrison Barnes, who, I understand, not a great player. He would have been fine on that bench. Patrick Williams starts. Harrison Barnes with Buzelis is your bench wings, right? You're asking Harrison Barnes to play 15, 20 minutes a game. That's it. He's a great mentor for Patrick Williams. He was in those Warriors locker rooms. He was in Dallas's locker rooms. He was in Sacramento's locker rooms as a role guy. Here's what I do. I play good defense and I catch and shoot the ball. That's it. That's my job. Here's how you do that, right? For a title team. Here's how you do that. Here's your blueprint. He could have taught Buzelis this. He could have taught Patrick Williams this. And what is the 75th thing I've said on this roster? We have too many guards, especially if LaVine's here. It seems like LaVine's here to stay, right? If anything, why wasn't it flipped, right? So say San Antonio gets Chris Duarte in 2 seconds. The Bulls get Harrison Barnes in a first. Why wasn't it the other way around, right? We need wings. We need size on this team. We need mentors for our wings that we have that are currently on the roster. Why not flip it? Why not say, hey, San Antonio, you are trying to figure out a bunch of guys. You're trying to figure out what your roles are. Here's Chris Duarte in 2 seconds. Because you could probably take those 2 seconds and one of your 17 picks and maybe move up in a draft in a couple of years. I think San Antonio still would have done it, right? I don't think it would have been that difficult to convince San Antonio to switch spots and say, hey, you guys take Chris Duarte. We'll take the burden of Harrison Barnes with the first, right? Because like I said for San Antonio, Harrison Barnes is here for a year. He mentors these guys. We get through the season. Harrison Barnes is an expiring contract. Who wants Harrison Barnes for a championship run as maybe your 8th or 9th guy, right? His contract's not horrible. It's not like it's $25 million a year. Like, it's a really simple move here, right? You say, okay, we'll take Harrison Barnes. We'll take the first. San Antonio, can you do us a favor? Take Chris Duarte and both seconds. We may even throw in an extra second just because we feel bad, right? Sure. I would do that 100 times out of 100. Demar wasn't coming back. He wasn't happy with the direction, which I understand. He's mid-30s. He wants to compete. Sacramento will allow him to do that. Makes perfect sense. So why wouldn't we take the first? We need first. We didn't get a first for Caruso. We're probably going to have to give him a first for LaVine. We may have to give up picks for Vooch. We are at the point where we are negative. We still owe San Antonio a pick for 2 years from now. I just don't understand how this organization can look at this roster and say, hey, we want to avoid the luxury tax. Let's do everything in our power and let San Antonio get the first out of this deal with DeMar and get the more expiring contract that's a little more appealing, right? Chris Duarte, we kind of know what he is. Not a big contract, pretty easily movable. Harrison Barnes, again, knows what he is a good role player. Take the good role player. Don't take the guy that's hurt all the time. Take the good role player. I understand we're trying to tank, but you still have to have somebody to teach Patrick Williams how to play basketball because his mentor just walked out the door. DeMar was the mentor. He's gone. Who's teaching Patrick Williams how to play basketball now? Zach LaVine? I hope not. Kobe White? He just figured out a primary role last year because he finally got a chance. Alex Caruso? Oh, wait. He's not here either. Vooch? God, I hope he's not teaching Patrick Williams how to shoot. Where is the old mentor for the starting to rebuild team that is going to help the guy that we just put 5-year contract on the table to sign here. I understand it's a flat rate contract. He'll make $18 million the entire time, which is great towards the end of it because then it looks like a steal. Looks like a little tougher right now. But where's his mentor now? Right? You go through this roster. Who? Javon Carter? Not the same position, right? Chris Duarte, again, not the same position. Harrison Barnes would have been a perfect mentor to say, hey, Patrick Williams, Buzelis, I want you every time we're on the road, every time we're in the gym, you are shadowing Harrison Barnes. Figure it out. But anyhow, that's my rant on it. So if I'm grading this, I think the Kings get a B. The only reason it's not an A in my mind, because obviously the guys that were traded weren't necessarily a big part of the rotation. I think it's the future first, right? Depending on how that future first goes, and that it's unprotected and it's a swap with San Antonio, who's probably going to be good at that point, makes me a little nervous, right? And you gave Demar a full 3 years, which means he's going to be in his upper 30s instead of his mid 30s by the time that's done. Makes me a little nervous. The Spurs, again, get an A because you just showed up to the party and they were like, here, take the best thing available. I'm like, yeah, sure, cool, sounds good. We'll take the first, sure. We're not trying to push for a title right now. That's fine. And then the Bulls get a C- because you took the worst of the two players in the trade. You took the worst of the two pick assets in the trade. I understand, again, there wasn't a whole lot of a market for DeMar. I get that. It was going to be slim pickings. But the fact that either A, you didn't just take the full trade and make it a 2-team trade and just bite the luxury tax for 1 year. I know this ownership group hates the word luxury tax. At some point, you got to man up and just do it, right? I understand this team's not going to be great. There's ways to get out of it, though. It's not the end of the world. So the Bulls the Bulls keep bullsing, right? That's just the way I'm going to phrase it. But yeah, again, if you guys like the content, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Unless there's big news, we will not be doing another episode until next Monday. We'll probably just do Monday episodes for the next couple of weeks. I may do like TikToks or something like that as far as the short form content. If, like, say the Bulls go on a really good summer league run, or I really have some observations I want to make on that, or if there's big trades and stuff like that, obviously we'll start pods for that. Like if we get a Levine trade, a Vooch trade, or if there's actual stars that get traded. But yeah, I appreciate you guys coming through. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.